Important libraries. Step 1. All 5 test cases got passed. Code coverage. Hello everyone. Very warm welcome to Think Constructive. I am Isha. In this session, I will be talking about how can you do unit testing for your Spring Boot REST API application. And this is the highly demanded session on my channel. So many of the viewers have already asked for this session. So finally, I have built a session for that. And in this session, I will start right from the beginning, what and why of unit testing, followed by all the important libraries and packages which you should be using in order to test your Spring Boot REST API application. That will be followed by the detailed demonstration using our Cloud Vendor API application. Alright, this session is going to be extremely useful for testing, rather unit testing your Java Spring Boot REST API applications, and also I will be demonstrating all 4 CRUD operations test cases here for all 3 layers, that is our controller layer, repository layer and service layer. I would highly suggest you open your Java editor and follow along with this session. This session will actually help you to write all sorts of JUnit test cases in your Spring Boot REST API application, and that will make your software quality very high. Alright, so let us quickly start with the what and why of JUnit. Let's now first understand what is unit testing. The simple meaning of unit testing is to test all the individual smallest units of your program or of your project. Alright, and what is the benefit of doing that? When you do that, you can make sure that every small piece of your project is working properly as desired, because that will give you the greater benefits when your program will grow all together. And another reason for using unit testing is to get the code coverage. Alright, now let's have a look on what we will be testing in this session. So here is our Cloud Vendor API application. This is what we built in our previous session. So just in case if you missed watching those sessions, I will highly recommend you to go ahead, watch those sessions. I have given all the sessions link in the above card sections as well as in the below description also. Alright, so find out some time, watch those sessions, and you can also get the complete Cloud Vendor API code from the GitHub link. Link is mentioned in the description section below. Alright, so feel free to watch those sessions in order to build the complete Spring Boot REST API application right from the beginning. Okay, currently I'll be explaining here what we will be doing in this session. That means what all layers we'll be testing in this session. Alright, so in our previous sessions, we have built our Cloud Vendor Information Service or Cloud Vendor API, in which we have built 3 layers, that is controller layer, business or service layer, and the database or repository layer. Finally, this database or repository layer is responsible to interact with the database, and the controller layer is responsible to interact with the external world. Alright, with the help of get, post, put and delete methods. All these things, all the CRUD operations we have already implemented. And the center layer, which we call as a business or service layer, is responsible to hold the business logic. Okay, so in this session, we will be writing unit test cases for our database repository layer. Then we'll be writing unit test cases for business or service layer, and then finally we'll be writing unit test cases for our controller layer. Alright, so I'll show you stepwise which all libraries or frameworks we will be using in order to test our repository layer. Then we will be writing the code to test our repository layer. That means JUnit test cases to test the repository layer. Then we will progress towards service layer. We'll first talk about what additional library or framework, if any, we will be using in order to test the service layer, and then we will be writing code to test the complete service layer, and that's how we'll proceed towards controller layer. Alright, so let us now first see what all framework or library we will be using in order to test our repository layer. We'll see how they can benefit us, and then we'll write the code for repository layer first. Alright, so let us proceed with our step 1. So the first framework which I'll be talking about, that is JUnit. Anyways, this JUnit framework will be used all throughout the 3 layers. Okay. So what is JUnit? JUnit is the testing framework, or rather more precisely unit testing framework for Java and its related frameworks. Alright, so we'll be using JUnit 5, which is the latest or the next generation of JUnit. So that means as of now, when I'm recording this session, JUnit 5 is the latest one. So this is what we'll be using. So what is the main purpose of JUnit? JUnit enables the developer side testing. That's what we had discussed, that what is the purpose of unit testing? It is majorly the developer side testing. Alright, and JUnit 5 includes focusing on Java 8 and above. That means your project should comply or should be using at least Java 8 version. It can be more also. Alright, let me show you JUnit website also. I'll just say JUnit, that itself is enough. I'll get into JUnit 5 website. Alright, so this is JUnit 5 website, and it is the 5th major version of programmer friendly testing framework for Java and the JVM, and majorly all Java frameworks support JUnit 5, whatever majorly frameworks you must be using. So currently, like, we are using Spring Boot. Anyways, that is the latest, most advanced and most used Java framework. So this is the JUnit 5 website. You can find out some time and explore this. So another framework which we will be using, or another library which we'll be using, that is AssertJ. So AssertJ is another Java library, and it provides a rich set of assertions and truly helpful error messages for Java developers. Right, so developer whomsoever is writing the unit test cases will be using AssertJ library for writing the assertions. What do we mean by assertions? We write assertions in order to specify how my program should behave. That means whenever I'm writing a piece of logic or a piece of code, as a developer, there should be somewhere in my mind that, okay, I have written method 1. So that means when I will give this kind of input to method 1, what should be the output when this method 1 gets executed, right? So that functionality or that method behavior can be checked with the help of assertions. Okay, I'll shortly show you how can you do that. And also it improves test code readability, and it is designed to be super easy to use within your favorite IDE. So like in my case, I will be using Intellij IDE, and it is highly supporting AssertJ framework. You can use Eclipse or any other Java editor, whichever you are comfortable with. They're all AssertJ, JUnit, all these libraries are supported. All right, I'll also show you the AssertJ library website. So whenever you find time, you can, go ahead and explore that. Here I will just say AssertJ docs. Okay, the first link what I'm getting, that is AssertJ Fluent Assertions library. It's GitHub page I'm reaching. All right, so if you want to read this thing in more detail, you can always come here and explore what all assertions, what all support, what all methods it is providing. All right, with respect to my application, whatever I'm using, I will be showing you certain assertions, how to include this library, and how can you use all those assertions. All right, next library which we'll be using is Mockito. So Mockito is a very powerful mocking framework in Java, and it lets you write the very clean, simple API, simple tests. All right, these tests are very readable and they produce clean verification errors. It requires Java 8 or above, so make sure you have that. All right. So I'll just show you the Mockito website also. I'll just say Mockito. Okay. And the first link is Mockito framework website. It is very popular framework for writing unit test cases, more specifically for mocking stuffs in Java. All right. So for writing Java test cases, the Mockito library is very helpful for mocking or stubbing the method calls or responses. All right, that's about Mockito. We'll shortly see how to introduce or how to include these dependencies in our Spring Boot project. All right, so the next is H2 database, which is in-memory database. All right, so it is a Java SQL in-memory database, and it is very, very fast and open source. Spring Boot can auto-configure embedded H2 databases. So when we say embedded, it comes embedded with the Spring Boot. All right, we just need to include its dependency and we'll be good to go. So for writing unit test cases, since we need to test each piece of code individually, even if different layer interaction is involved. So in that cases, we will be mocking certain responses, and whenever there is any database interaction, we'll actually not go ahead and connect our application to the real-time database which we are using in the application. Rather, we'll make our application to connect to in-memory database. For example, let's say H2 database in our case, and the entire DB will be created, and whatever data we would want, that will be inserted in the H2 database in memory whenever our Spring Boot application comes up, and whatever data we would be needing in order to satisfy our unit test cases will be picked up from there. All right. So I'll quickly show you H2 database website also. So you'll just say H2 database. And here is the first link, H2 database engine. So here is a website for H2 database. I have taken a couple of points from all these official websites itself. Okay, so feel free to explore these. No need to install this database separately as it comes bundled with the Spring Boot. We just need to include the H2 database dependency in our Spring Boot application. All right. Here is the Intellij IDEA editor. I will be using my Cloud Vendor API application. This is what I kept open here. I would reiterate that I have tagged all the previous Spring Boot sessions link in the card section above as well as in the description box below, and also session details are being flashed on your screen right now. So if you haven't yet watched those sessions, please go ahead and watch those sessions. Those sessions are going to be extremely helpful for you. For now, for this session, I will just quickly show you all the layers here, which we have already written in our previous sessions, as I told you. So I'll just show you all the layers here, and we'll start with the repository one. All right. So here is my Cloud Vendor API application. This is the source main Java. Inside this, you can see Constructive.rest demo. We have built controller layer. Inside this, Cloud Vendor controller Java class is existing. Then we have built service layer in which service interface and service implementation is given. And then we have built our repository layer in which repository interface is built. We have also created model because model is anyways necessary in order to store all these details and deal with it. Exception handling also we have done in our previous sessions. Okay. And also how to handle or how to create a custom response handling in any Java Spring Boot REST API application. So all those things we have already done in our previous sessions. Okay, so currently I will open our repository layer. This is the one, and we'll show you how can you start writing test cases for this. All right, one more thing we should notice, in parallel to main, there is a test package also. All right, so by default, when you create any Spring Boot application initially, by default this much structure will be created for you. So in parallel to main, there will be a test package. Inside that, Java, similar package structure, Constructive REST demo, I mean whichever package name you are using, and then your starter point like this. Okay, so this much will be given to you by default. And now for creating our applications JUnit test cases, like for repository layer, we should be having exactly similar package structure here also, and inside this Cloud Vendor repository test class would go. All right. So now let us first include the dependencies, because in order to test, we should be needing some dependencies. So I'll just open pom.xml. Now here in pom.xml, you need not to include JUnit dependency because it comes bundled with the Spring Boot. Whenever you create any Spring Boot application, this dependency gets included. More specifically, with the help of Spring Initializer, if you create this dependency, gets included by default. You can always check your pom.xml if this dependency is given, because it automatically comes bundled with the Spring Boot. All right, if you don't have that, include this dependency. So group ID will be org.springframework.boot. Artifact ID will be Spring Boot starter test, and a scope should be test. Okay. So you need to check in your pom.xml whether it is existing or not. It should exist ideally. Okay, so I'll just quickly open this artifact ID and will show you where the JUnit dependency is existing. All right. So what you need to do, you need to just say control click. The moment you do this, you'll get inside Spring Boot starter test pom. All right. I will just search for JUnit. See, dependency org JUnit is already included. Okay. And version you can notice 5.8.2. So as discussed, we are going to use JUnit 5 version here. So that JUnit 5 is already bundled. Okay. Another dependency what we will be using is AssertJ, right, for assertions. So let us find out whether assert library exists in this or not. So the moment I searched AssertJ, this AssertJ dependency is also existing. All right. So you can notice this AssertJ library, that is org.assertj, and artifact ID is AssertJ-core and version 3.22, which is the latest version, right? So this is already existing in Spring Boot starter test. Okay. So two dependencies we have seen, JUnit and AssertJ. Now the third dependency what we will be checking now is Mockito. Okay. That's what we talked about. So let us now try to find out whether Mockito exists in Spring Boot starter test or not. So here is a Mockito dependency. The group ID you can see org.mockito, artifact ID is Mockito-core. So, and the Mockito version is 4.5.1. Okay. So this is the Mockito dependency which we will be needing further to mock request and responses or stubbing for the method in our demonstration. Okay. And now the last dependency what we need is H2 database in order to get database responses populated in memory in our Spring Boot application. All right. So let us first try to find out whether we have H2 here. So this is a dependency. No, H2 database doesn't exist in Spring Boot starter test.pom. So three dependencies we have found here. Now I'll close it. I'll come back to my main pom.xml. This is the one, and only one extra dependency I should be including here, that is my H2 database dependency. Okay. So just after this dependency, I'll have the dependency tag. Okay. So here in group ID, I will say com dot H2 database. Now you can see it in the suggestion also. Okay. Artifact, it has automatically taken as H2. This is what we wanted. And we should define the scope also. Since we are using it for testing purposes, so I will give scope as test. All right. So three dependencies are existing here in Spring Boot starter test, and one more which we wanted, H2 database dependency is here now. All right. I will just refresh my Maven dependencies so that it can load the changes. So it is resolving dependencies. Okay. And it's perfect. Okay. So you can see this tick sign. That means everything is perfect. It has resolved all the dependencies. Fine. Now we have got H2 database dependencies populated. Now the next step is to populate the corresponding application.properties or application.yaml file. Just like we have done the resources folder in our main application. In the similar way, in the corresponding exactly similar package structure, we should have for this resources also. So you can see just parallel to Java, there is a resources folder. Similarly, I will create resources folder in my test package also. All right. So I'll say directory resources. Okay. It was already suggesting. Okay. So inside this resources, I will create a new file called application.yaml. You can have application.properties also. Since my project is getting synced up with Git, so I'll just add this file there. All right. And I will just paste the required content of application.yaml here and will explain you that. Okay. These are the properties which we'll be needing in our application.yaml. So we should be giving Spring data source URL. Likewise, we had given for MySQL. We should be giving URL here, starting with JDBC. Then here the database name should come, which in this case is H2, then colon double forward slashes mem colon db, okay, and semicolon, then db close delay is equal to -1, okay. We should be giving username and password as SASA because this is the username and password for H2DB by default for the embedded Spring Boot. Driver class name will be as org.h2.driver. Alright, so this is the data source properties we should be populating. Next part is JPA properties. So inside this JPA properties Hibernate, the dialect for H2 database we should be giving as org Hibernate dialect and H2 dialect. Alright, don't give any other dialect, otherwise it will give random and confusing errors. Then show SQL true we can say, because when we do this we will be able to see in the logs all the SQL statements it is having. Okay, so for clarity and understanding purposes this will be good. Another setting we should have JPA Hibernate DDL auto. We are saying create drop. So create drop, what it does is the moment you will shut down your Spring Boot application, it will clear the entire in-memory database, and the moment you will bring up your Spring Boot application, it will create a new one. Okay, so that's how you should be creating your application.yaml or application.properties. Just in case you need application.properties file also for this, ask that in the comment section. I'll provide you that file also. So whichever you are comfortable, you can use that. Alright, so this is about the H2 database configuration and the dependencies. So two things we have completed. Now, the next thing what we should be doing is we should start creating test cases for repository. Let us first see our repository interface. So here is our Cloud Vendor repository interface, and for this we should be writing our test cases. Okay, so again the structure is very important. So keep in mind, likewise resources we have created. For this repository and this interface test case, we should create exact similar repository package here inside com.thinkconstructive.restdemo. Here a repository package should come, and inside that we should have our Cloud Vendor repository test class. Alright, so let us start creating our repository package here. So I'll just say Java class, and what name I would want to give, Cloud Vendor repository test. Okay, so there's a name I would want to give to my test class, and also I should keep it inside repository package. Okay, so I'll just say repository dot Cloud Vendor repository test. All right, I'll add it to Git, and here is my class. Okay, so you can notice exact similar structure. Yeah, exact similar structure inside com.thinkconstructive rest demo. Repository package is created here inside test also, and Cloud Vendor repository test class is created. All right, I'll come back to this and we'll create test cases here. So now Cloud Vendor repository.java, I'll explain a couple of things here and then we'll start creating test cases. Okay, so my Cloud Vendor repository is extending JPA repository, and you can notice I have only kept one method here, that is find by vendor name, but my Cloud Vendor repository is actually able to do find all, find by ID, save method, update, delete, everything. But I haven't written any methods here. That means all these methods are already provided to us by JPA repository. That means JPA repository already has these methods implemented and tested. Okay, notice here and tested. That means something which is inbuilt provided to us in terms of libraries or frameworks by Java or Java related frameworks, like in this case here as Spring Boot and Spring Data JPA, what we are using. So all these things are already provided to us. When we say that, that means those things are already tested properly. When things are already tested properly and given to us, so then there is no need to retest them again and again. So what I'm trying to say here, there is no need to write any unit test cases for the methods which we are directly reusing or using given by JPA repository here. Okay. Only one method what we are writing here, that is find by vendor name. This method is not given by JPA repository because this is very specific method which we wanted to have. So this method we have written in our project. So this is one method which has to be unit tested. Okay. So I'll be writing test cases for this method only, which is find by vendor name. What this method is doing? It is finding vendor details from the database basis on the given name and returning a list of cloud vendors. Why? Because we are assuming that there can be more than one vendors with the same name. All right. So now coming back to cloud vendor repository test class. Now let's start writing the required test cases for find by vendor name for our cloud vendor repository test. All right. So first of all, we should annotate this cloud vendor repository test class as data JPA test. So the purpose of having data JPA test annotation here, let a Spring Boot application know that it should be using the embedded in-memory database for data related or database related activities. All right. Before writing the test case for this, one more thing which I would like to explain. Let's say I am having any method. Okay. This method will take some input or might not take also, depends. Okay. And this method will have certain statements. Let's say statement 1, statement 2, etc. All right. And finally, it must be generating some output. Maybe it is returning or not returning, but it must be doing final output or something. All right. So what is exactly happening whenever we write any method or any functionality? That functionality is designed to do something. It will have some values or something provided. We'll do some execution on that and finally we'll be generating the output. So having said that, in order to understand any unit test structure, we all should understand there should be something which is provided or given. Okay. Basis on that provided or given, when there is some execution, okay, then there will be some answer or some output will be generated. Okay. So in more simplified terms, I will just say there will be some stuff given for JUnit structure, and when that stuff gets executed, okay, then there is some answer, some response or some output. All right. This structure you should always keep in your mind whenever you are actually writing unit test cases. Okay. It's going to help you a lot then. All right. So now let us start writing the test cases here. Okay. So first of all, since we are writing the test case for repository, so we should be, inject that class here. How will I do that? I will say auto-wired. What? I'll make it private. My cloud vendor repository. Okay. And I will call it cloud vendor repository itself. All right. And next thing, since we are dealing with the cloud vendor entity, so let us have the reference for that. Cloud vendor. I'll call it cloud vendor. Okay. Not populating the data here for this cloud vendor. Will tell you why. Now, for writing any unit test class, it is always a best practice to have all the initialization thing. Let's say I want to populate data for this cloud vendor, or I want, and after populating this data, let's say I want to populate the data for this cloud vendor. That is something which is initialization kind of stuff. That should go inside a method called setup. Okay. And whenever my class execution gets finished, gets over, all the resources should be cleared off. So that clearing kind of stuffs will always go inside tear down. These methods will be auto called. So I will just generate setup method. Okay. And generate tear down method. All right. So inside setup method, what I want to do, I want to first instantiate my cloud vendor. Okay. So cloud vendor is equal to new cloud vendor. Okay. And we'll call it parameterized constructor because I want some values in this. Okay. So I'll just say 1. That is my vendor ID. Another parameter is vendor name. Amazon. Then I want vendor address, let's say USA, and then I want vendor phone number, let's say XXXXX. Okay, we'll terminate it with a semicolon. Let me just shift it to next line. It looks good now. Fine. So I have created cloud vendor object with all these values. There is one object I have now. Now, what I want to save this details. Okay, so I will say cloud vendor repository dot save. Fine. And herein I will pass my cloud vendor entity. Clear? So what will happen whenever this class gets executed? First of all, this method will be called and all this initialization will take place. Okay. And similarly, what next I want, whenever this class execution gets finished, all these resources should be cleared off. So how do I do that? I will just say cloud vendor is equal to null, set it to null and clear off the database. So how do I do that? I will just say cloud vendor repository dot delete all. Done. So setup, tear down, all these methods are important. As a best practice, you should be using them. All right. Now what I want to write the test cases for find by vendor name. Okay. For writing test cases find by vendor name, I'll be creating 2 test cases here. Okay. First test case is a success scenario. Another test case I'll be creating is for failure. Okay. So these 2 test cases we'll be creating. Let us start creating the first one. So whenever we write any test case, we should use the annotation as test. Okay. This @test annotation will indicate the method mentioned below should be treated as a test case. Alright, so let me start writing that and I will just say that my test case won't return anything. So I'll mention it as void and I'll start writing my test case name starting from test. Okay, so I'll just say test find by vendor name and we are testing a found case here. So I'll just say found. Okay, this method won't accept anything. And inside this test case, the first thing what am I going to do? I'll be calling cloud vendor repositories method that is find by vendor name. So I'll just say cloud vendor repository dot find by vendor name. And what is the vendor name I would want to fetch? That is Amazon. All right. Since it's repository method, we can just check is returning list of cloud vendors. Okay, so I will just say list of my model class or entity name that is cloud vendor. Okay, let me just import this list class from java.util. Okay, and I'll just say cloud vendor list is equal to this one. All right. So what am I doing here? I am just calling find by vendor name from cloud vendor repository and it is returning the list of cloud vendors. All right. So now the next thing is I should be checking the behavior or what is it actually returning. Is it actually returning what we are expecting or not? So in order to do that, I should call assert that method from our assertions library, which we discussed. And in that assert method, I should first be passing what am I getting actually. That means in cloud vendor list, let me just check as a first element, what am I getting? Okay, so I'll just say get 0 and let me just import this assertion. Notice it is AssertJ core API library we should be using. Okay, it might also suggest you that Jupyter assertions, so don't use that. Go ahead with the assertion library which we discussed. All right, and after that I should be comparing it. How will I compare? Is equal to, inside that I will just say my entity, which is cloud vendor dot get vendor id. If both the IDs are matching, that means this find by vendor name is behaving as expected. All right, if you want, you can check more attributes also. So let us for this test case check one more attribute. So I will just say assert that cloud vendor list dot get 0. Okay, because one element it will be returning, because we have mocked only cloud vendor with name as Amazon. And here dot get vendor id is missing. Okay, so this get vendor id will be compared with this one here. From get 0, let's say I want to compare get vendor address. Okay, so I will just say is equal to, let me just shift it to next line to increase the readability, and we'll say cloud vendor dot get address. All right, so if this get vendor address is matching with this one, that means find by vendor name is behaving as expected. That means it is returning the complete correct vendor object which we have mocked here. All right, which we have saved in our in-memory database. Okay, so let us now execute this test case and check the behavior. Okay. Cool, my test case is passed. Fine. Let us have a quick look on the logs also. So you can see in this test case, there is a query, select query is executed, then insert query is executed for cloud vendor info entity, because this is my tables or entity name in the database, and then further 2 more select queries got executed. All right. And here in the main test result log also, you can notice embedded database factory is initiated. Okay, so here with this you can see starting embedded database with URL as JDBC H2. So what it is indicating, my H2 database, which is my Spring Boot's embedded database, got initiated. All right, so I hope this clarifies that in the repository test cases, embedded or in-memory database which we have configured is getting used, not the MySQL database. All right, so now let me just minimize the logs, and now let us write the failure test case. From the failure test case, what I mean is I'm trying to find out a vendor name which does not exist in my database. That means I haven't saved that vendor name here. So in our case, what we have done, we have saved only Amazon cloud vendor detail in our in-memory database. Okay, so let's say if I try to find out GCP, that is Google Cloud providers, that they are another big cloud providers. So if I try to find out that from my in-memory database, definitely I won't be getting anything, right? So let us now write the test case for that. So let us just copy this one here, and we'll do the required changes. So first of all, I will just say this is not found test case. Fine. And what I will try to find out here. So I'll just say GCP, or you can also write Google Cloud Provider or any other cloud provider here. Okay. Or any other name. Essentially, this is a fixed string what we are passing here. Okay. And let me just write another set of assertions here. So what am I doing? Now I am trying to find out cloud vendor name GCP. Okay. When I'm trying to find out something which I know will not be existing in my in-memory database, that means I am expecting certain behavior. Definitely, I'm not expecting that it is going to return me this value or that value. What am I expecting here? It won't return me anything, right? If it returns, then the test case should fail. If it doesn't return, then the test case should pass. So I will again say assert that, and in that assert that, this time in terms of actual, what should I pass? I will just say cloud vendor list dot is empty. Okay, it should be empty. How will I verify that? I will just say if this is empty is returning true. Okay, so if this assertion passes, that means this list is empty. That is where this is empty method will say it is true, right? That is where this true comparison will be successful. This is empty will be returning true, and the assertion will be compared with is true. That in turn will say it is true, right? The true comparison will be passing, and then I should get this test case passed. All right. So let me now execute this test case. Oh, sorry. See, can you guess what mistake I have done? I did not mention @ test here. Okay. So you can notice when I missed mentioning it, I will not even getting the execution sign here. That means this test find by vendor name underscore not found was not getting treated as a test case. The moment I put this annotation, it is now identified that this particular method is not a normal method, rather it is a test case. So it should be treated as a test case. That is where I am now getting this run directly here itself. All right. So I'll directly run the test case from here. Cool. Right. So my test find by vendor name not found is passed. That means in this case, when I'm trying to find out Google Cloud Provider, or in short GCP, it's not getting anything. So that is where it is returning empty list, and that is where this assertion behavior comparison is coming out as true. All right. So I hope this part is very clear. Now let us see one more execution wherein I will be executing this complete test repository class. All right. So I'll just say run cloud vendor repository test. Ideally now both the test case should get executed. Okay, because I am executing the complete test class. So test find by vendor name not found is successful. That is where I am getting a green tick here. And test find by vendor name found is also successful. So I am getting a green tick here. Let me show you one more stuff here. Then we'll move towards service layer. Okay, here in the assert, I have written that whether this list is empty or not. If it is true, my test case should pass. All right. Let me show you. If I will say is false, that means I'm saying this list should not be empty. Now let us see what happens. Let me execute this test case. What happened? My test case got failed. Why? It's clearly telling here in the log expecting value to be false, right? Because I have given is false here, correct? But was true. But since my list is empty, so this is empty is returning true. So expected was false and actual was true. So my test case would fail. That's how, you know, if you will do some miscalculation or you are expecting something but you are getting something, so behavior would fail. The behavior comparisons would fail. All right. So in that case, your test case would fail. All right. So let me just revert the changes. I don't want my test case to fail. Okay. Right. So my cloud vendor repository test class is ready. We have understood how you can do the repository layer testing with the help of JUnit, AssertJ, and in-memory database, which is H2 database. All right, I hope all those libraries, usage, and how to use them, how to write test cases for your repository layer is very, very clear to everyone. All right, so now from here, I will just close these classes and let us move towards service layer. That is my next layer, middle layer, wherein normally we write business logic. Okay. We have seen how to create repository test classes. Here we should be creating a parallel structure, and inside that I should have my test class and have the test cases. All right. So now this is the interface. So I'll be writing Cloud Vendor service impl layer test cases directly. All right. Because this is the place where I have written all the service layer or business logic. Fine. Here what will I do? I will straight away create its test class, just like the parallel structure inside the test package, what we discussed for repository. So inside the test package, here I should have a service directory, and inside that I should have Cloud Vendor service test class. All right. So I will tell you one IntelliJ shortcut here, wherein I will just say Shift Command T here. Okay. And what it is asking for? Create new test. So I'll straight away create new test from here. Okay. And it is asking what should be the class name. So I'll go with the, suggested one, because it's a good name which I would like to use. Cloud Vendor Service Simple Test. Testing library is JUnit 5. This is what I wanted. I would also want to create setup and tear down methods here also. And we'll select all the methods here, because I'm going to write the test cases for the complete CRUD operation, including get all and get by vendor name also. Okay. So I'll just say okay. So we'll add this file to Git, and I have got the skeleton class created here directly in my test package. The same parallel structure I have got. See, service.impl, Cloud Vendor service impl test. Cool. Yeah. I'll just say my import statement. So as I mentioned, we are not going to use JUnit Jupyter assertions. So JUnit Jupyter assertion default import I'll remove. Okay. In place of this, when needed, we'll be importing assertion libraries, which comes from AssertJ.core. Fine. So now let's start writing test cases for our service layer inside Cloud Vendor Service Simple Test. Okay. So here I should be first of all mocking the entire repository layer, because as I mentioned, unit test cases are done individually for each piece, right? So even if my service layer is talking to repository layer, and then repository layer is directly talking to database, but I am not supposed to make my service layer talk to database. So in order to get database responses, what should I be doing? I should be mocking those things directly here, so that it won't, look for the database connections and all. Rather, whatever database responses it will be needing, it should get from the mocked stuffs here. So for that matter, we should be first of all mocking repository layer. All right. All these things, each and every step and part is extremely important. So I would suggest don't leave things in between, or don't just fast forward. Otherwise these concepts will be missed out. Follow each and every discussion and concept here religiously, and then you will really become expert in writing JUnits. Okay, so I'm going to mock the complete repository layer here. So I will just say Cloud Vendor repository mock. Fine. I also need an instance for Cloud Vendor service, because ultimately I'm writing test cases for service layer. So I should be having at least the instance for that. So I'll mark it as private, and I will just say Cloud Vendor service. Okay. Fine. I will also create instance of auto closable. Auto closable, I'll just explain it. The purpose of auto closable to close all the unwanted resources when the entire class or entire test cases execution gets finished. So another instance I would be needing is of Cloud Vendor. Fine. So let us write some initialization steps in setup. Okay. So first of all, I will write my auto closable is equal to Mockito annotations dot open marks. Okay. For this class, the moment setup method will be called, Mockito annotation.openMocks for the entire class will be called. So mock will be opened here. Okay, why am I mentioning it in auto closable? Because the purpose of auto closable is to close all the resources the moment this class finishes its execution. So release all the resources immediately. Another thing what I will do, I will just say cloud vendor service is equal to new. That means I am, instantiating cloud vendor service. So I will instantiate cloud vendor service. So I will just say cloud vendor service is equal to new cloud vendor service impl, and inside that what I should inject cloud vendor repository. Fine. One more thing we'll write in setup method. We'll say cloud vendor is equal to new cloud vendor. Basically the initialization of cloud vendor object. So I will use parameterized constructor can here. All right. So Amazon, then address as USA, and phone number as XXXX. All right. Let me just shift it to next line to make it more readable. Okay. So we have initialized all three stuffs here inside setup. Now here in tear down, we'll just call auto closable dot close. All right. And since it throws exceptions, so we'll just write throws exception here. Fine. Now let us come to create cloud vendor test case. First of all, let us rename it. I'll just call it test create cloud vendor, and inside this we should be writing the test case for testing the cloud vendor service dot create cloud vendor method. All right, so let's have a look on this method implementation. So here is the implementation for create cloud vendor, and what is it doing? It is calling cloud vendor repository dot save and then returning success. All right, so essentially what should we be doing here? We should be mocking this cloud vendor repository, okay, so that whatever response we would like, we can return that with the help of save, and finally we should be able to assert the behavior. All right, unit testing is for testing the individual pieces, and they are not required to call other layers. So wherever other layer calls are done, those calls has to be mocked. So that's what we are going to here. So first of all, we should be mocking cloud vendor class, because the entire entity we will mock here. Okay. Let me just import this mock stuffs. Okay. Another thing we'll be mocking here is cloud repository class. Okay. Cloud vendor repository dot class. All right. Now we should be defining that whenever cloud vendor repository dot save is called, then what kind of answer it should return. How can we do that? We'll be calling Mockito dot when, and inside this we'll say cloud vendor repository dot save. All right, and inside this save we should pass cloud vendor entity. That means whenever cloud vendor repository dot save is called with cloud vendor entity, then what it should return? It should return the cloud vendor object itself. All right. Now let's call cloud vendor service dot create cloud vendor method and assert its behavior. So I'll directly be calling assert that method. Okay. And inside that, the actual value, what will I do? I will call cloud vendor service dot create cloud vendor method, and inside this I'll be passing cloud vendor entity. All right. So whatever it will be, whatever this call will be returning will become the actual of assert that. Okay. And how would I want to compare? I would want to call it with is equal to inside this the success string. Why am I writing success here? Because if cloud vendor service dot create cloud vendor method call is successfully executed, it will always return success as a string. That's what we have just now seen in our Cloud Vendor service impl.java. All right. Now let us execute and see what happens. Test create cloud vendor method is passed. So basically this test case is passed. All right. So we have written test case for create cloud vendor. Now similarly, let us write the test case for update cloud vendor. All right. So here inside update cloud vendor, I'll be just pasting the same code. Let me just rename this test case method name. All right. So I've pasted the same code here. Cloud vendor repository.save would remain same here because update is also calling. Here we can see update cloud vendor is also calling cloud vendor repository.save and returning success. All right. So here this call would remain same. Inside assert, I will be calling cloud vendor service dot update cloud vendor. All right. And it will also be compared with success string because it is also returning success as a response. All right, let us now execute this test case and see what happens. So test update cloud vendor is passed. So this test case is also passed. Fine. So what we have done, we have written two test cases, test create cloud vendor and then test update cloud vendor. All right. Next is delete cloud vendor. So I'll just come back to this test case. Before that, let us write all the get cloud vendor, get by vendor name and get all cloud vendors test cases. And at last, we'll be writing delete cloud vendor test case. All right. So let us now write the test case for get cloud vendor. In case of get cloud vendor also, we will be mocking cloud vendor class and cloud vendor repository class. All right. So I'll just say cloud vendor dot class and mock cloud vendor repository dot class. All right. Reason would remain same. Okay. And now what we should be doing, let us go back to our cloud vendor service simple. And here for get cloud vendor, we can see it is calling cloud vendor repository dot find by ID. All right. So that means I should be defining when cloud vendor repository dot find by ID is called, then what should happen. All right. So I will say when cloud vendor repository dot find by ID with let's say string ID as 1 is called, then it should return optional of nullable and then cloud vendor. Fine. Why am I writing optional of nullable? Because this cloud vendor entity might or might not exist. Fine. So this find by ID might get some value or might not. So that is why I'm using optional dot nullable. Fine. So I have defined when this cloud vendor repository dot find by ID will be called, then what it should return. Now I should assert the behavior, right? So I will call assert that. Inside that, I will call cloud vendor service dot get cloud vendor. All right. And here the ID is 1. Okay. And if it gets the object, let's say I would like to compare the get vendor name. So vendor name I would like to compare. Fine. With dot is equal to, I would want to compare it with cloud vendor dot get vendor name. Fine. So whatever vendor name I am getting from here after this method call, that I would want to compare with cloud vendor dot get name. Fine. So let us now test the behavior. So my get cloud vendor test case is passed. Let us refactor get cloud vendor test case name. So let's say we call it test get cloud vendor. All right. Just to increase readability, again I'm repeating. From the execution point of view, there is no difference. Whatever name I want, I can keep. But to have a more readable, maintainable name, I should have some name like this, or at least as per your project guidelines. Fine. I'm just telling you some generic stuffs. Okay. So now let us check our get all cloud vendors. Okay. Or let us first check get by vendor name. Okay. So I'll just shift this method upwards. Yeah. Here. And let us now first refactor its name. So I will just say test get by vendor name, and inside this it is mostly similar to this get cloud vendor by ID. I'll be pasting code here. Inside this, instead of find by ID, I will just say find by vendor name. Okay. And since this is returning the list of vendors, not a single vendor, because what we assumed, there can be more than one vendor names with the same name. Okay. So what will I do? I will just remove this optional because this is acting only for one record. Okay. So here inside this then return, what should I do? I should have some list, right? So I will have array list, and this type will be cloud vendor. Okay. And I will initialize this array list with the, let's say, collections dot singleton, and inside this I will just say my cloud vendor entity, because this is what we are anticipating to get. And in this find by vendor name, I will just say Amazon. All right. So when cloud vendor repository with find by name as Amazon is called, it will be returning something like this. Fine. I'll remove the complete assertion and let us start writing a fresh one here. I'll just say assert that. Fine. And inside this, I'll directly calling my cloud service or cloud vendor service dot get by vendor name, and inside this I know I've created Amazon, so I should get it right. So I will just say cloud vendor service get by vendor name Amazon. Okay, since it is returning a list, so I should call my get 0 at least, because I'm expecting at least one record. Okay, and then I will, let's say, compare my vendor ID now. Okay, shifting it to next line, dot is equal to what? Cloud vendor dot get by vendor ID. Okay. So what I have done, since this get by vendor name is returning the list of vendors, that is where I said get 0. So at least one record I should be getting. So I'll say get 0, and whatever vendor ID I'm getting, I'm comparing that with cloud vendor dot get vendor ID. Fine. So this is how you should be doing the behavior comparison. Let us now test and see what happens. So my test case is passed. Fine. Green tick is here, and test. Which test case is passed? Test get by vendor name. All right. Now let us write get all cloud vendors. Get all cloud vendors, as the name itself says, it will return. It might return more than one records. So it must be returning some list, right? So again, mocking would remain same. I should be mocking my entity and repository. Now I should be writing when cloud vendor repository dot find all will be called, then what it should return. So then return, since again it is a list, so it will be similar to this thing what we have done here. Okay, terminated. Correct. So what I have done, cloud vendor repository dot find all, when this is called, then what should return? This thing, the list of cloud vendor, and inside that the cloud vendor one record is being returned. Now I should be comparing its behavior. So I will call assert that, and inside this, first of all, the main method which I am trying to test here, my cloud vendor service dot get all cloud vendors. Fine. No argument it expects, so I will just leave it as is. Then again, let us have its first element, so get 0 dot, this time let us compare the vendor phone number. shift it to next line, is equal to what? Cloud vendor dot get phone number. Fine. Similar explanation here also. Cloud vendor service dot get all cloud vendor method is called since it might return more than one record. So I'm calling get 0. At least one I'm expecting it should get, and get vendor phone number. It should be compared with the expected one, right? So let us now execute and see the output. My test case is passed. Which one? Get all cloud vendors. Let us just change its name to increase the readability. I will just say test get all cloud vendors. Alright. So there is one test case pending now. Let us go back and write that. Where is it? Delete. Okay. Let me just shift it to the last. So let us now write the test case for delete cloud vendor. So I will just say mock my cloud vendor entity, okay, dot class, okay. I will say another mock for cloud vendor repository dot class, okay. Now for delete, the case is bit specific. Since JPA repository delete method doesn't return anything, okay, so a normal then return this value or that value won't fit here. We should be doing a little bit extra of that. How to do that? I'll tell you. First of all, while mocking cloud vendor repository, I should be passing one more argument here, that is Mockito dot call real methods, okay. This is how you should be doing it. So this is the process I am telling you, okay. Let us have a look on the delete cloud vendor method here. So for delete cloud vendor, what we have done, cloud vendor repository dot delete by ID. Okay, directly delete by ID we have called from cloud vendor repository. So let us go inside delete by ID and see. Delete by ID, it returns void. So whenever we have this kind of method which is returning void, for writing the test cases, for that there is a specific procedure, and that is what I am telling you here, okay. Sorry, this place, yeah, okay, fine. So what do? I will say do answer. Do answer belongs to Mockito only. So that is the library we are using here. So do answer, inside this I will say answers dot calls real method dot when, okay. And in this when, what will I do? I will say my cloud vendor repository dot delete by ID, and let me just generalize it. So I will just say any ID, okay. So what I have done, I will say do answer method from the Mockito library should be called, and answers calls to real method whenever cloud vendor repository dot delete by ID with any ID is being called, right. That's how you should be writing. Now let us start asserting the behavior. I will say assert that inside this cloud vendor service dot delete cloud vendor, because this is the method I want to test, and let's say I want to pass ID as 1, okay, is equal to what this delete cloud vendor implementation is returning, success string, right. So if this method call cloud vendor service dot delete cloud vendor ID gets successful, it should return success. So I will mention that string here itself. So it should be compared with that. Fine. Now let us execute and test this. Delete cloud vendor test case is passed. I've got a green tick. Okay. So that's how you should be writing the test case for any method which is returning void. You should mock it a little further with calls real methods. Okay. Let me just refactor the test case name. I will say test delete. Again, repeating to increase the readability. Okay, so I have written all the test cases for my service implementation class. Okay, and let us now execute the complete test class and see all the test cases are getting passed or not. So I've got all the green ticks. How many test cases we have written? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Create, update, delete, get all, get cloud vendor, get cloud vendor by name. Alright, so all my 6 test cases got passed. In the similar manner, you can write there, multiple permutation combination to ensure your each piece of code is working fine or not. One more thing I would like to show you here, and I will just go back to the repository test class, and there also I will show you. If you want to check the code coverage, because code coverage is something in order to ensure your code quality, your software quality, whatever software you are building, the code coverage is something which is very important. And normally in projects, the guidelines are set to above 90%. Expectation is although anyways 100%. But yeah, very high code coverage is needed. So as a developer, we have written all this code. How do we ensure that each and every line of code is really covered? Okay, so for that, Intellij is a very powerful editor and gives you feature inbuilt here itself. So from developer point of view, what you can do, you will just say run your test class with coverage. Okay. It has executed all my test cases. Fine. All test cases are passed. And here you can notice it has opened one more window wherein it is saying 100% classes, 92% lines covered in all the classes. Okay. So let us click and go to the class. So this is the class for which we were writing the test cases. My cloud vendor service simple class. Okay. Right from the beginning, this is one piece, or in simple terms one method, which is eventually a constructor, all green. Create cloud vendor method, all green. All green means this piece of code is fully covered. Okay. Update cloud vendor, all green, code covered. Delete cloud vendor, all green, code covered. Okay. In get cloud vendor, you've got green, red and green. Okay. So this essentially this piece code coverage is left out. This is what it is telling. Then get all cloud vendors, all green. Get by vendor name, all green. Fine. This is how you can check how much code coverage is done with your test cases. Okay. Now let us see the same stuff for our repository test. Okay. So I will just say this repository, run repository test with coverage. 2 test cases we have written. Okay. I will just say add to active suits because just now we have done for service layer. So in the same suite, this will be appended. So 2 test cases, both are passed. Okay. And this is my coverage window. So here, first one is repository, second one is service. Okay, so repository layer is already 100% covered. Fine. Now let me just close all these windows and we will open our controller layer. So cloud vendor controller. Okay. This is one more layer for which we should be writing test cases. Okay. So after writing test cases for cloud vendor controller layer, our all 3 layer test cases will be completed. Okay. I will again say Control Shift T, create new test. Testing library Junit 5, this is what we wanted, cloud vendor controller test. Okay. And we'll be selecting setup and tear down generation, and we'll be selecting which all test cases or which all methods test cases I would want to write. So we'll say get cloud vendor details, get all, create, update, delete. Fine. I'll just say okay. Add. My class skeleton is created. I'll just check import stuff, and from here we'll remove JUnit Jupyter. Okay. So this is my cloud vendor controller test. Okay. So for writing controller layer test cases, what is the actual purpose of controller layer? To interact with the external world. That means All the URLs, get, post, put, delete, all those URLs will be exposed from here, and internally it will be handing over, or calling my service layer for further processing. So essentially we should be mocking all the web related stuffs here in this layer, and we should be checking whether all those URLs are working fine or not. Okay. So in order to do that, I should be using an annotation that is web MVC test, and here I will be first mentioning my controller class. Okay. So cloud vendor controller dot class. Alright. Inside this test class, I should inject my mock MVC because this is the web layer URL testing, as I told you. So for that, web MVC test is mandatory, and then we should be injecting our mock MVC here. A normal mock will not work, rather mock MVC part will work here. Okay, I will be injecting my mock MVC. I will just say private mock MVC. Okay. Let us import this. It comes from Springframework test. Okay, and let me just put an annotation auto wired here. Okay, so mock MVC is injected in my cloud vendor controller test. Now next step is, since controller layer is talking to service layer, so we should be mocking our service layer here. Okay, so I'll just say mock bean. Okay, private cloud vendor service. Okay, so cloud vendor service is mocked here with the help of mock bean. Okay, and mock bean is directly provided by Spring Framework, or rather more precisely Spring Boot framework. Okay, so no need to explicitly include any other library for that, it is auto provided. I will be creating two instances for my entity cloud vendor. I call it 1. I'll just tell you why am I doing that. Cloud vendor 2. Okay, and I will also have a list of cloud vendor. That's how you should be doing all these things. Cloud vendor list is equal to new array list. Okay. Now inside setter, we should be doing the initialization stuff. So I'll be populating cloud vendor 1 is equal to new cloud vendor, and we'll be giving the values here. Okay. So first cloud vendor I want to keep as Amazon. Vendor address and then vendor number. Okay, and another one cloud vendor 2. Let me just copy, paste and change the values. Okay, so another cloud vendor should be cloud vendor 2. Let's say Google Cloud Service GCP I'll be using. I'll say address as UK and phone number, let's say YY. Alright, so 2 cloud vendor instances we have created, another one, and the next thing is I'll be adding both the cloud vendors to the cloud vendor list. So I will say cloud vendor 1 and cloud vendor list dot and cloud vendor 2. Okay, so both the cloud vendor details are added to cloud vendor list. Let us start writing get cloud vendor details test here. Okay, so again I will just change the name to test get cloud vendor details. Okay, now what do I want to test? I want to specifically test my get mapping. Alright, so get URL which we are exposing, we should be testing that. And ultimately, if you notice this controller layer here, get cloud vendor details, whenever it is being called, it is actually talking to get cloud vendor service. Okay, and calling its get cloud vendor method. So important part is I should be first defining the behavior of this cloud vendor service dot get cloud vendor method. Whenever this is called, then what it should return, because ultimately Layers will not be interacting with each other whenever we are writing any unit test case. Okay, it will be tested separately. So I should be defining the behavior with the help of when. Okay, import a static when from the Mockito library. Okay, so inside this when, I will just say cloud vendor service dot get cloud vendor, and inside this I will be passing in. Whenever this is being called, what it should do, let me just shift it to next line. So then what it should do, then what it should return cloud vendor 1, let's say. Fine. Next step is I should be mocking the URL. Okay, I should define this dot mock MVC. Okay, dot perform. Perform is the method given by mock MVC. So perform is the method which will be called here, and inside this I will call get method, and inside this I will be giving the URL. Okay, let us put an import for this get, and remember this get will not be collections.get kind of stuff. Rather, I'm just going to paste the import statement here. So this get will come from mock MVC request builders, which belongs to Spring Framework test. It is provided by Spring Framework itself. All right. So here now inside this I should be writing the URL. Okay, what is my URL? Slash cloud vendor. Okay, so I'll give slash cloud vendor, then again forward slash, and then the value. So let's say for 1 I am invoking this get request. All right, then after that I will say and do. Okay, inside this I will just say print. I would want to print. Okay, and then what am I expecting? What am I expecting here? That means if my cloud slash cloud vendor slash 1 gets invoked properly and does its job, then it should be returning the status as okay. So there is a method called status. Okay, and I will say is. Let me first import this. Okay, it will come again from the mocking things. Is okay. Okay, so what am I expecting? If it gets invoked properly, the status should be okay. Fine, HTTP status. Why am I getting this error? Because this perform method throws exception. So let me just write throws exception, and this error is gone. You can notice. Fine. So what I have done? I've just said perform using mock MVC, perform a get request on this URL. Okay, it opens up things in the mocking way internally. It won't open the real URL. Okay, so it will create a dummy URL. Fine. And if this get URL does its job, that means it is able to get the response from here properly. Okay, it should return the status as okay. Fine. Let us now run this test. So my test case test get cloud vendor details is passed. Fine. And here let us see its log also, because that is very important. So you can see mock HTTP servlet request is being built. Okay, just to test this method. It is similar to our repository layer testing, wherein we invoked embedded in memory database. So here mock HTTP servlet request, that means the mocked request is being formed. Method is selected as get. URI is given as the way we have given here. Parameter header body, nothing was needed. Okay. And then what that means, in order to invoke this URL, whatever needed was done. Okay. A dummy URL was formed, and you can see mock HTTP servlet response is being made with the status as 200. No errors. Headers, content type is being passed, and in body you can see inside data tag you have got the complete vendor object with HTTP status as okay. So we just now check this attribute. If you want check, you can compare and check all this. Okay, so whatever value from the response body you would want to check, you can go ahead and check that. All right. So I hope this part is very clear to everyone. Okay. We have tested our get cloud vendor details. Now, if I want to test my get all cloud vendor details, how will I do that? I will just rename the method to test get all cloud vendor details, and inside this, so I'll be just copying this here and do the required changes because these two methods are very similar. That means these get will anyways remain same. I shouldn't be passing any parameter because get all won't expect any parameter, and I should be changing get cloud vendor service method here, and rather than get cloud vendor detail I should be calling get all cloud vendors here. Okay, and since get all cloud vendor returns list, so I will be returning in the answer as list here. Okay, and this perform method throws exceptions, so I should say this method throws exception. This is one way to handle it. All right, so here this mock MVC will perform get with this URL this time, only slash cloud vendor, no one or no other parameter. Fine, and then it will print all whatever we want and will compare the status as okay. Fine, let us now test this thing. So test get all cloud vendor details is passed, and if we come here, this time HTTP method remains get, but request URI is slash cloud vendor. Okay, in the mock HTTP servlet response, status 200, headers, content type, and in the body you can see list of object is coming. Okay, so this is one, and you can see this is 2. Okay, fine. So I hope this part is clear, and you can notice a status 200, that means HTTP status okay, that is where my comparison is successful. Alright, now I will come back to create and update because there are some specific stuffs here in addition to whatever we discussed. I will first tell you how to write delete cloud vendor details test cases, and then we'll see create and update. Okay, so in delete I will just say delete test delete cloud vendor details, just rename the method, and inside this again what do? I will first define cloud vendor service delete method, what it should return whenever it is being called. So I will say cloud vendor service dot delete cloud vendor, and here inside this I will say id as 1. Okay, and here I will say then return whatever this method from the service class is returning. Okay. So let us check what my cloud vendor service implementation is returning. So delete by id, what this method is returning is success. Okay, so I'll come back here, sorry, to my test class, and here I will say then return success. Fine. Now again I will perform delete operation this time with the help of mock MVC. So I will say this dot mock MVC dot perform. Okay, since it throws exception, so I will just say throws exception. Okay, and inside perform I will be this time calling delete method, and here I will be writing the URI which is cloud vendor. Okay, and it is always delete by id, so I should be passing vendor id here. Fine. Now I will say dot and do, I want it to print everything because that gives us a lot more clarity and what to expect. Again I'll be checking the status is okay or not, that means this method call and the entire behavior is successful or not. Fine. So what I have done, I have just called, I have defined whenever cloud vendor service delete cloud vendor by id is called, it will return success. Fine. And whenever mock MVC will perform delete operation on this given URI, what am I expecting? The status should be HTTP status okay. Fine. If it works successfully, it will give it right. So I'll now execute and see the output. So test delete cloud vendor details, executed successfully. I'll come inside, see the logs. This time you can notice HTTP method delete is called, request URI is /cloud_vendor/1. And what is it? Mock HTTP servlet request. Fine, good. Let us see the response. Mock HTTP servlet response, status as 200. Headers are defined here. Content type is this one. And body cloud vendor deleted successfully. Okay. So good. Yeah. So delete cloud vendor test case is written properly. Now we will write create cloud vendor details and update cloud vendor details test cases. Fine. You can define multiple permutation combination and write many more test cases. Okay. So let me just rename it to test create cloud vendor details, and inside this. So here first of all we will be defining whenever cloud vendor service dot create cloud vendor is called, then what it should return. Okay. Similar to the thing which we have done. So I will say cloud vendor service dot create cloud vendor, and here I should be passing the entity. Let's say I will pass cloud vendor 1. Okay. Then what it should return? It should return some string. So whatever value this cloud vendor service dot create cloud vendor implementation is returning, we will be writing that. So it is always success we are returning from here. So I will just say success. All right. Now again, I'll be writing my mock MVC stuff. So I will say this dot mock MVC dot perform, and this time it should be post request. So create is always post, right? So HTTP method is post. Inside this, I will be passing the URI as /cloud vendor. All right. Throws exception to get rid of from perform error. So we all know whenever we are creating or posting anything, we should be giving its data what we want to post in the request body, and we should also tell what type of request is it. Is it like JSON or XML or what it is? Fine. So that means we should be defining that also. So after writing post URL, I will say content type, and here I should be giving media type as application.json because this is what we are using. If you want to use anything else, you can mention that also. And in content method, I should be giving the content. That means what value I want to post. In our case, we are posting a JSON body. So let's say I am saying request JSON. Okay. I'll just come back to this request JSON. Fine. So this is how you should be creating a post request with the help of mock MVC. So basically mocking is happening here. And once this is done, what I want to do, I want to print first of all everything in the log window, and what I want to expect inside expect, I'm just checking status is okay. Is okay. Fine. Now coming back to content part. So for the post request in the body, JSON body is requested because we have set the media type as application JSON. But if you notice, we have cloud vendor 1 as an entity, as an object. We don't have JSON right now. So what we need to do, we need to convert this cloud vendor 1 object to the JSON and then pass that JSON body here. Okay, so for that I'm just pasting the code here. So I've pasted the code here. This code is for let me just sort out the import stuffs. Okay, yeah, so this is the code for converting the object to JSON. All right, you can create any utility method and keep the code there, and you can call directly from there, or you can paste the code here as well. Likewise, I have done. Either way, it is fine. So what this code is doing, this code is converting the object to JSON. This is what the request JSON I have passed here. All right. So now the post test case is completely written, and let us now execute and see. So the test case for create cloud vendor details is successful. You can notice in the logs, mock HTTP servlet request. HTTP method is now taken as post request URI / cloud vendor. Headers application JSON and request body is my JSON body. All right. Similarly, we can just see mock HTTP servlet response status is 200 and the body is returning a successful message, the same message which we are returning from cloud vendor controller. I'll just show you that as well. Here, create cloud vendor details. At the time of this post trigger, this method will be called, and if everything is fine, it will return cloud vendor created successfully. This is what we have just now seen, and the HTTP status will be okay, and this is the okay thing we are comparing. Fine. Similarly, we can write the test case for update cloud vendor details also. Let me just rename it to test update cloud vendor details, and let us now paste this stuff here, because put is very similar to post. Okay, we'll just do the required changes which is needed for update. First change, cloud vendor service, instead of create cloud vendor, update cloud vendor method should be called. Fine. And for performing, and for this mock MVC perform, it should call put instead of post, because for update put will be used. All right, and everything else would remain same. Now let us quickly execute and see the output for test update cloud vendor details test case. So this test update cloud vendor details test case is also passed. We can see the logs. Mock HTTP servlet request, this time HTTP method is taken as put. Okay. And what are we getting in response? Mock HTTP servlet response status is 200. And this time the successful message is cloud vendor updated successfully, right? This is the response we are returning from update cloud vendor controller. All right. Now we have written all the test cases, including get all for our controller layer also. Now let's execute the complete cloud vendor controller test suite with code coverage and see how much code coverage we could achieve. All 5 test cases got passed. Fine. Let us now see our code coverage window. So cloud vendor controller test, you can see 100% code coverage we are achieving, and directly we can jump from here by double clicking to source. That means our controller class. Fine. All the green signs, get all cloud. Let us start from the beginning. So my constructor is covered. Get cloud vendor details is covered. Then get all cloud vendor details is covered. Create cloud vendor details, update cloud vendor details, delete cloud vendor details. All methods are green. That means all methods, lines of codes are tested successfully, covered successfully, and which is a very good thing for your projects. So whatever piece of code in Java Spring Boot REST API you are writing, if you can test it like this, that means full coverage you are able to achieve. That will be fantastic for your software development, right? And your project bars will go very high. So I would again reiterate, please open the session and try out all those things along with the session. That means try out this complete example along with the session. That's going to be extremely helpful for your Java projects. And as a software developer, your profile will become highly valuable. All right. So I hope all these points are extremely clear. All 3 layers of testing, all the library packages, frameworks, whatever we have used in this demonstration is extremely clear to all of you. If you have any doubts, ask your doubts in the comments section. And also I would request you to tag the timeline which you really found very, very helpful to you, because that will further help everybody else. All right. Share this demonstration, this session details with all your friends wherever you really feel they are looking forward to learn JUnit or unit testing in Java Spring Boot project. So to summarize what all we have covered in this session, we talked about what and why unit testing is so important, what it is, what all unit testing libraries or frameworks are essential for testing the Spring Boot REST API application. We talked about JUnit, AssertJ, Mockito, H2 database, Spring Framework test library, which is essentially used in the controller layer testing. Then we tested all three layers, that is controller layer, repository layer, and service layer. And we also saw how we can test the entire test class using code coverage. What is the importance of code coverage and how can you check how much percentage of code is covered? This tool comes inbuilt with Intellij, even free version, that is community edition. All the unit test cases we have written, we have demonstrated for our Cloud Vendor API application, which we have been writing in our Spring Boot sessions. All right. So if you haven't watched them, go ahead, watch those sessions. Links are written in the card section above, as well as links are also given in the description box below. This code GitHub link is also given. So make use of all these things and try out all those examples. I'm sure this will help you in your Java projects. All right. Thank you everyone for watching the session. I'm sure after watching this session, you must be more confident for writing unit test cases for your Spring Boot REST API application. And believe me, once you write all that confidently in your project code coverage will very, very high and your software quality will also become very high, which is going to be very helpful for your projects, for your career. All right, if you like the session, hit the like button, and if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. Subscribe now and ring the notification bell so that you are always updated with the new upcoming session on this channel. I'll continue bringing more and more sessions on Java Spring Boot REST API. So feel free to share the channel and session details with more and more people so that we grow together more stronger as a community. Thank you once again. Stay connected with Think Constructive. See you in the next session. Bye for now.